Hello and welcome to episode 49 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm one of the co-founders here at ETR. I am quarantined in my very small home with a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And as I am each and every week, I am joined by the legend himself, fellow ETR co-founder Evan Silva. Evan, what's going on?
A lot, definitely. And, especially in the NFL, it's just like, it's almost like we bypass, or we use this, what's supposed to be a negotiating period just to get all the deals done. I mean, no deal is technically official until Wednesday, recording this on Tuesday, kind of in the late afternoon. But no deal is technically official until Wednesday at 4 p.m. But the NFL just says, they don't care. And they're going to go forward with all these deals are technically agreed to in principle. We'll probably have one or two fall through on Wednesday, but I think the vast majority, upwards, over 90%, these are locked in deals, and we've been keeping tabs on them at the free agent tracker, and I've been trying to add some analysis on every move.
Yeah, it's just a weird thing also with everything going on our planet right now, with everybody in quarantine and what's going on with Corona, and then also to have free agency going on. It's been a welcome distraction for me. I mean, instead of going on Twitter and just seeing either people on one end of the spectrum or the other about the world is imploding or everything's going to be fine, seeing stuff about football, I think has been a welcome distraction. As Evan said, go to Establish the Run, check out his free agency tracker. He's giving his thoughts on every move, not just the skill players, but also defensive players, offensive line, etc., etc. We will have more articles up. I'm working on fantasy winners and losers right now as we speak, stemming from free agency. Hope to have that up soon. Also, I want to address a couple other quick business items to our XFL subscribers who we love. I'm really upset that the XFL season got cut short halfway through. I was having a ton of fun grinding it. You should have received an email, and hopefully you saw our tweet, but everyone who purchased a season pass to XFL, you'll be getting a refund of half of your money back, $60 automatically. We thought that was the most fair. But I hope to see XFL back in 2021. We'll see if that happens, but I hope to see it back in 21. Also, want to let everyone know that producer Luke is crushing it in the YouTube game right now. All these podcasts are going up on YouTube. If you can bear to look at us, you will find us on YouTube. Also, Evan's Top 100 and Tracker are going with free agency, as I mentioned, and Pat Kareem's Dynasty rankings are up for free right now, includes contract status, notes on his top 200. He's added rookies in there now. He'll be doing an update to reflect free agency later this week. So head to EstablishTheRun.com, check it all out. All right, let's get to the business at hand here, Evan, because it has been, I guess maybe I say this every year, but this feels like one of the wildest starts to the league year that I can remember, at least for skill players. And it started off with one of the most mind-numbing, I couldn't believe it trades. And normally I give the benefit of the doubt. I'm easier on these NFL GMs and coaches than Evan is. I try to say, hey, if I was in their shoes, it's not that easy. But this one, this is the most egregious thing I've ever seen, this DeAndre Hopkins trade. DeAndre Hopkins was traded from Houston, where he allegedly had a falling out with Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien didn't want him anymore. DeAndre Hopkins happy to leave, take his talents to Arizona, play with Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury in the air raids. So, Evan, first your thoughts on the trade, which, I've tweeted out about a bunch. We're here to talk about fantasy, not to talk about how egregious this was, but I just almost can't help but talk about how egregious it was. And then also, how do you think DeAndre Hopkins fits with the Arizona Cardinals and Kyler Murray?
Yeah, I don't even spend much time ripping Bill O'Brien because just everyone else does it.
Right, exactly.
So, I don't even, it's a waste of time for me to pile on. We know that the guy is just way out of his depth. And, let's talk about the fantasy impact.
Yeah.
DeAndre Hopkins going to Arizona. So, if you, go back historically and you think about just the Cliff Kingsbury scheme and where he comes from the Mike Leach background. He played at Texas Tech for Mike Leach. And that's really, and they ran a 4 wide receiver offense on 33% of their plays this past year, by far most in the NFL. They essentially don't even use a tight end. And they want to spread you out. And really how they had their most success in the first season with a dual threat quarterback, with an offensive line that run blocked really well, and just being able to spread out defenses, was they had one of the best running games in the league in year one. And they did have a rookie quarterback who I think had a pretty good rookie season. but that was they determined that was the best way for them to play. But historically, if you listen to Mike Leach talk, he says, he's been asked about the concept of offensive balance. And most people, when they think of offensive balance, they think like, 50-50 run pass split. But Mike Leach sees offensive balance as a near equal distribution of getting the ball to your playmakers. So how does that apply to DeAndre Hopkins? Is he going to be force-fed like he was in Houston? He had 150 targets 5 straight years in Houston. I mean, his rapport on the field with Deshaun Watson was impeccable. I mean, I think that Deshaun Watson made DeAndre Hopkins better, and I think that DeAndre Hopkins made Deshaun Watson better. And that was one of the top 3 quarterback wide receiver connections in the league for the past couple of seasons since Deshaun Watson came into the league. So how are things going to change for DeAndre Hopkins into this offense that doesn't necessarily force feed one guy? I mean, I think that he's going to have a good season, but is he going to be able to get to 150 targets again? I think he's going to be drafted like he is. I don't think there's any chance he's going to get out of the second round. He's going to be a wide receiver changing teams. Mm-hmm. Larry Fitzgerald, I know that he's washed, but I mean, he's still probably going to get 100 targets or 90. And Christian Kirk is an ascending player, and Kenyan Drake is used in the passing game as well. So I think that he's going to be a really risky fantasy pick. I think that the biggest beneficiary here ultimately is Kyler Murray.
Oh, yeah. I agree. I mean, we don't see guys approach 30% target shares over a large stretch area often. DeAndre Hopkins consistently had 31% target shares over the course of a season with the Texans. He will not get that with Arizona. He's also, you introduce risk anytime a guy changes teams, for sure. So, yeah, I think DeAndre Hopkins' fantasy value has taken a hit. Kyler Murray was fantasy's QB 12 in points per game last year with just, the corpse of Larry Fitzgerald. Christian Kirk was hurt. They didn't use Andy Isabella. He had like Demir Byrd and Keyshawn Johnson. Now you give him DeAndre Hopkins. You give him year 2 in the scheme. You let Andy Isabella take a step forward. Maybe you draft another pass catcher. It got to the point last year where they weren't even running 4 wide at the end of the year. They actually used the tight end at the end of the year. They had just kind of given up on playing fast and playing 4 wide. So I think they can return to the scheme, and that'll be good for Kyler Murray too. So We had talked, I think, last podcast about how I thought Kyler Murray had a chance to be in the top 5, and you said, let's see if the Cardinals can execute on their moves for weaponry to see before I put him in the top 5 among quarterbacks. And we're seeing them at least begin to execute that in a big way with DeAndre Hopkins. So, certainly
I wrote about it in the free agent tracker, like just dropping DeAndre Hopkins into, all the routes that Demir Byrd and Keyshawn Johnson were running last year and Trent Sherfield. I mean, you can't even think of a bigger upgrade than that.
Let's talk about Kenyan Drake. And part of this trade was getting, Cardinals somehow, I don't know how, they got out from under David Johnson's contract and got DeAndre Hopkins for it. But it leaves Kenyan Drake in a really good spot. I mean, Kenyan Drake, they put the transition tag on him. They're going to pay Kenyan Drake somewhere in the neighborhood of $8.5 million this year. And that's a lot for a running back. His backup will be Chase Edmonds. I thought Kenyan Drake looked really good. I know you did too down the stretch last year for the Cardinals. Caught 28 balls in 8 games and, over 5 yards a carry. You've talked plenty about how this scheme and this offensive line blocked really well in the run game. I'm super optimistic on Kenyan Drake in this offense. Now, what are your thoughts on them giving Kenyan Drake the transition tag?
Yeah, just because I hadn't resorted, fully, I haven't fully reshuffled the top 150. I will when things kind of slow down. I put him as like a lock, and talking about him in the free agent tracker as like a lock to be a top 15, ranked as a top 15 running back. And I think it's not crazy to think that he might land in the top 12. I just have to redo the rankings, so I don't want to say anything, irresponsible. But I put him as a definite top 15 running back from a projection standpoint. And just the offense is going to be better too. And I think that they might use their first round pick on another offensive lineman, and that obviously would further bolster the offense. But you're talking about some serious firepower at the skill positions right now. Mm-hmm. Kyler Murray, the dual threat, entering his second season in this spread attack. Larry Fitzgerald being still a viable possession receiver, an accomplished slot receiver. Christian Kirk, who flashed big-time playmaking ability in his second season. Wish he would have stayed a little bit more healthy. But he probably will be. He should catch some injury regression, positive regression this year. Kenyan Drake coming back, and then DeAndre Hopkins, and then you mentioned Andy Isabella, who's a big time wild card, as like a speedster who struggled to get on the field, but maybe he could be that fourth option and just add speed in that number 4 receiver role. So it's a really exciting offense. And yeah, I think that Kyler Murray definitely belongs among, potentially among the top 5 quarterbacks entering 2020.
I got to get my shot in here on Larry Fitzgerald. I think the optimal 4 wide receiver set for the Cardinals would be DeAndre Hopkins, Andy Isabella, Christian Kirk, and either a first or second round pick at wide receiver, and get Larry Fitzgerald's ass on the bench. But, parentheses, Ducks. Okay, let's talk about David Johnson, because I think this one is controversial. Like, I don't know. I'm curious what you think. Do you think what we saw from David Johnson last year was what David Johnson is now? I mean, he's still only 28 years old. He doesn't have a ton of mileage on him. Is he as washed as he looked last year? The Texans don't think so. Now, Texans, they have a 3rd round pick for Duke Johnson last year and barely used him. So the fact that they took on David Johnson and his contract doesn't say that much to me, but he's going to count $11 million against the cap in 2020, $9 million against the cap in 2021. Like, they must think he's still got juice left. I'm curious if you think David Johnson still has juice left and how he fits now in this Houston offense, which I think without DeAndre Hopkins certainly got way worse.
Yeah, and there's a lot of opportunity available in Houston. I'm not sure what to think about what David Johnson has left. I'm skeptical that he can stay healthy. Players that have back injuries are scary, and he's had a lingering back injury. He's had knee problems. I don't think that he can fill that Carlos Hyde role. I don't think he's as good of a between the tackles runner as Carlos Hyde is. And I think that David Johnson really is like a plus sized, space back, really is really what he is. And we saw his optimal usage early in his career under Bruce Arians. Otherwise, his usage really hasn't. I mean, he's never been a great between the tackles runner. You could go back and watch him play at Northern Iowa. He wasn't. He was an excellent receiving back, and Bruce Arians knew how to get him into space. Are we going to rely on Bill O'Brien to get this guy into space consistently? Are we going to rely on Deshaun Watson, who is historically likelier to take off and run than check the ball down? That was one of the things that worked against Duke Johnson as well last year, was he just wasn't a good fit really with his quarterback. And I think that that's another problem that David Johnson could run into. So I put in the free agent tracker that I think that he's going to be an RB3 pick. He does have a lot of opportunity. And at the end of the day, that's really, what should drive us when we're making fantasy football decisions. But I think that Duke Johnson is a better player than him, and I don't think that Duke Johnson is going to go away. And I kind of question the fit, how he's going to fit into Houston's offense.
Yeah, I was really hoping that Bruce Arians would go out and get David Johnson. I know Tampa has bigger fish to fry right now as they figure out their quarterback situation, which we'll talk about in a minute here. But yeah, I'm just not skeptical that Bill O'Brien and the Texans know what they're doing, because David Johnson and Duke Johnson are kind of redundant. And so I was not optimistic given the way they used Duke Johnson last year. I know Evan wasn't either. I thought one of the funniest signings of free agency was after losing DeAndre Hopkins, Bill O'Brien turns around and says, "Hey, I got an idea. We just lost DeAndre Hopkins. Let's sign Randall Cobb to a 3-year, $27 million contract." Never mind that he turns 30 in August, that he hasn't really been productive since 2014, despite playing with Aaron Rodgers and then Dak Prescott last year. Never mind the fact that we have Kiki Kute on the roster, who can play very well in the slot. But we're going to go ahead and give Randall Cobb 3 years, $27 million. I mean, it's scary for Deshaun Watson. I would assume that you'll be moving Deshaun Watson down in your rankings. I think that Deshaun Watson can still get it done due to his legs, due to his aggression, due to how he plays when this team is behind, as you've talked about plenty. But yeah, I'm just, you can't help but want to move down Deshaun Watson. Do you have any optimism on Randall Cobb in Houston?
No. I mean, from a fantasy standpoint, no. I think that the way that the Texans are going to go is they don't have a first round pick, by the way, so they can't get one of these, stud receivers necessarily. I think their first pick is like somewhere in the 50s. The Daniel Jeremiah had 6 wide receivers in his first round, and they're probably not going to be in position in his initial mock draft, and they're probably not going to be in position to get one of those guys. So they're going to try to kind of use like a wide receiver committee approach. Pray that Will Fuller stays healthy, which he has not been able to do almost whatsoever since entering the NFL. Hope that Kenny Stills takes a leap in his second year in the offense. They did acquire him right before the season last year, and his contributions were very up and down, and that's to be expected for a wide receiver in that sort of a situation. And then Randall Cobb as their veteran slot receiver, who really just his playmaking ability has just kind of evaporated over the past couple of years, or really over the past half decade. And then Kiki Kute, who was just in the doghouse for almost the entire season, and then the two tight ends, Jordan Akins and Darren Fells. Yeah. That's the skill position core. It's really severely downgraded without DeAndre Hopkins, and Deshaun Watson probably going to move down. I mean, I had him as the quarterback 3 before free agency. I don't know. I suppose he might stay in the quarterback 3 spot because Russell Wilson is in number 4. But in terms of where he is in the top 150, he's going to go way down, because before I had him right there with Mahomes and Lamar.
Yeah, I mean, I have concerns with Will Fuller staying healthy, obviously. And also, I mean, Kenny Stills had some awesome opportunities last year and flubbed them hard. I torched way too much money on Kenny Stills last year, and I'm kind of skeptical that he will be effective as an every down player just because he had the chance last year and he didn't do it. Maybe in year 2 he will. Speaking of wide receivers, this was one that was super interesting. Stefon Diggs has kind of been hinting that he wants out of Minnesota for a while, and I thought Minnesota actually did pretty well given that to get what they got from Buffalo. They got a first-round pick, a fifth-round pick, a sixth-round pick, a seventh-round pick, and a 2021 fourth-round pick for Stef Diggs. They'll now roll with Stef Diggs, John Brown, and Cole Beasley in their 3 wide receiver set. Stef Diggs wasn't happy in Minnesota, and his target share, I think, has a chance to go up in Buffalo. But I don't know, man. Josh Allen, Matt Harmon has talked plenty about how Stef Diggs is the best route runner in the NFL. Does that matter with Josh Allen? I feel like Josh Allen's just chuck it deep and hope it works out. So I don't know. I like Stef Diggs. I just don't know if this is the best place for him to pop off in fantasy. I'm curious what you think.
I think that the situation is sort of similar to DeAndre Hopkins going to Arizona, and I would have more optimism about DeAndre Hopkins being able to maintain something close to his normal level of production than I would Stef Diggs in Buffalo. And, Stef Diggs, I don't think the Vikings wanted to trade him, but I think that he convinced them that, and they did get a big offer from Buffalo. He got a lot of compensation. But I think that he just caused such a stir that they were like, what, it's not worth it anymore. And I think that they're probably going to draft somebody like Denzel Mims, or maybe try to move up and get Henry Ruggs in the draft. They're going to need to add a field stretcher. And Adam Thielen, by the way, is looking like a candidate to compete, like a 150 target candidate right now. But Stefon Diggs, I think it's a be careful what you wish for kind of situation, because Josh Allen, much less accurate, much less efficient than Kirk Cousins. Josh Allen, is able to kind of keep his head above water because he's so good as a runner. This is not going to, be a pass-first offense. I think Stef Diggs had problems with the run-first offense in Minnesota, and, he's not going to a pass-first offense. And I think he's got, even in terms of bodies, Cole Beasley, John Brown, just as much, and Dawson Knox entering his second season, just as much competition, if not more, for targets in Buffalo. So I'm not sure he's going to be happy in Buffalo. Mm-hmm. And I think that he's going to be a guy that I think he's going to be real up and down as a fantasy producer.
Yeah. I mean, Buffalo, when you look at red zone throwing rate, goal line throwing rate, it's all really bad for Stef Diggs because Josh Allen is running so much around the goal line, and they're trying to run the ball so much to prevent Josh Allen from kind of flying off the rails. So, yeah, I have concerns about Stef Diggs in Buffalo as well. But from a real life perspective, I think Buffalo has a really good chance now to win the NFC East for the reasons that we're about to talk about. I woke up on this morning, to the news that Tom Brady was officially leaving New England. I didn't think it was going to happen, but I think I don't. Here's my guess at what actually happened. My guess at what actually happened is he wanted somebody like DeAndre Hopkins. He wanted someone like Stef Diggs, and he wanted the Patriots to go get them. They didn't, but it might be because those guys didn't want to play with like kind of a 43-year-old washed up Tom Brady. And I know people don't want to hear that, but I think maybe that's what happened. So now he figures I can go to Tampa, I can go to LA, I can get some real weapons. I have a chance to win there. I don't know, man. I was just kind of shocked though. And from the Patriots perspective, like people who think that they just woke up today and were like, oh man, what are we going to do at quarterback now? Like they obviously have some kind of plan. I don't know what that plan is, but they obviously have some kind of plan. Maybe it's they tank and they try to get Trevor Lawrence in the draft next year or something like that. I don't know. But pretty shocking news. I want to talk a little bit. I think it's down to either the Bucks or the Chargers. I'm curious what you think would happen for Tom Brady with those teams, how you would affect Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, guys like Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler in the rankings, should Tom Brady go to one of those places? And do you have any idea what you think the Patriots are going to do at quarterback? I thought Jarrett Stidham was actually pretty decent in preseason last year. We used him a ton.
Yeah, he was awesome in preseason last year.
Yeah.
The Chargers did trade for Trey Turner, and they just signed Brian Bulaga right before we started the show. Mm-hmm. So they are definitely like gearing up to try to improve their offensive line. But their offensive line, I mean, they still have a ways to go on their offensive line. And Tampa Bay doesn't have a great offensive line either, even though they've pumped a ton of resources into it. So that's a deficiency, I think, for both teams. I think that if you just look at the personnel for the Chargers, it really fits well with Tom Brady's skill set and what he does well. Mike Williams is kind of like the role player on the outside. But Keenan Allen is a guy who can run those option routes and is one of the best route runners in the league and is going to be able to create separation. Austin Eckler is like the ultimate fit with Tom Brady as a guy who can, is so good out of the backfield, can line up in the slot and move around. And I mean, I think that Austin Eckler could I think he's very quarterback dependent. And I think that the best case scenario for Austin Eckler would be to get a pocket passer, willing to check the ball down, willing to make smart decisions under pressure. And Tom Brady, I think, fits that bill. For Tampa Bay, I think that Godwin would be just fine. And then I think you would have a legitimate sense of worry about Mike Evans because we just have not seen Tom Brady be a plus downfield passer in quite a while.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things about people don't realize, I think, was so beneficial to Mike Evans and Godwin last year was you have these YOLO quarterbacks, Ryan Fitzpatrick and Jameis Winston. They're throwing pick sixes. They're throwing all these interceptions. Their team's getting behind. They get into these wild shootouts. Like, that doesn't really happen in Tom Brady games. Like, it's going to be way more game managing. So I have major concerns I would actually personally knock down Chris Godwin some if Tom Brady signs there over Jameis. And I would certainly knock down Mike Evans plenty. But we'll have more on Tom Brady once he officially signs. Again, it's Tuesday at 4:30 Eastern. We do expect Tom Brady to decide his next spot some point later this week. Speaking of quarterback news, Teddy Bridgewater got a 3-year, $60 million deal from the Carolina Panthers. Cam Newton looks like will either be traded or released. When we saw Teddy Bridgewater last year, he played better than I thought, but it was so check down. He had the lowest ADOT in the league, as pointed out by Mike Clay. And maybe that's just the Saints offense, right? Like Drew Brees is extremely check downy also. Maybe that was just Saints offense. Maybe Teddy can push the ball down the field, but it's not the best for Curtis Samuel. Certainly good for Christian McCaffrey, I think. What do you think of Teddy Bridgewater going to the Carolina Panthers to be their new starter?
I think that he's like kind of a rich man's Kyle Allen. I think that, I didn't get real excited about it. I think he's going to be able to get the ball to DJ Moore, who is a fast ascending player. And I'm with you that I think that Christian McCaffrey doesn't lose anything. And then I'm concerned about Curtis Samuel not taking a step forward. I do like the fact that Teddy Bridgewater has familiarity with Joe Brady, who's the Panthers' new OC, who did an unbelievable job with the LSU offense this past year. Just such a fun offense to watch. The tempo at which they played. I mean, they just rip off plays. I mean, just an awesome offense to watch. And Joe Brady was on the Saints staff in 2018 when the Saints acquired Teddy Bridgewater. So there's a level of familiarity there. I think that Bridgewater is good enough to get the ball to Ian Thomas, who is a prime breakout candidate at tight end. But I think that the Panthers, I think that once they really get to know Teddy Bridgewater, I think that they'll probably be looking for their next quarterback almost immediately, because
Yeah.
I think that he is one of these guys who's a low end starter and a really good backup.
Uh, yeah, and by the way, Cam Newton, a lot of rumors going around that he will be traded or signed with the Bears, which would be interesting. We'll address where Cam Newton lands once he makes his decision, once that all plays out. Other quarterback news, a day or two before free agency opened, Ryan Tannehill got his 4-year, $118 million deal from the Titans. And look, I know the Titans were kind of backed into a corner here. They didn't have a lot of options. Ryan Tannehill was going to command something around this on the open market, but I just hate to pay for guys coming off outlier seasons. Ryan Tannehill's yards per attempt last year was the second best mark since 1954. His touchdown rate was second in the NFL behind only Lamar Jackson. Like, that stuff is certainly going to regress. All that said, he has some rushing equity. He has good weapons. Derrick Henry is back, which means it's going to be a low volume passing attack, but I still think Ryan Tannehill can be efficient. I don't want to bang on this from a fantasy perspective too much, but from real life, I don't know if the Titans are ever winning the Super Bowl with Ryan Tannehill as their quarterback. Maybe I could be wrong, though. But what do you think about the Titans did? They franchised Derrick Henry, and they gave Ryan Tannehill $118 million.
It's just all about continuity. It's they went deep in the playoffs last year. So, but yeah, they franchised Derrick Henry. They've had so much offensive coordinator turnover over the last 4 or 5 years, and they're bringing back the same head coach, the same OC, Arthur Smith, who I think did a great job in his first year as calling plays for the Titans. A.J. Brown, there's a guy that can really, really elevate. He wasn't even a full-time player until the second half of the season. I think they could definitely get more out of Corey Davis and Jonnu Smith. So I think it's just all about continuity. And, that's what they're going to kind of hang their hat on. And they really have done a good job of limiting opponent scoring over the past couple of years. And so I think that they feel like they can be consistently competitive with a roster makeup like this. But yeah, in terms of becoming the best team in the league, I'm with you that I think that there's a ceiling on their upside.
Yeah, I do think that Derrick Henry coming back is, for his fantasy outlook, probably the best. No other team was probably as equipped to just build their whole offense around Derrick Henry as the Titans did, just because they've done it already. So, I still think Derrick Henry is a candidate to be majorly overdrafted, but going back to Tennessee, I think was the best outcome for his fantasy outlook. This next one just seemed unnecessary to me. I don't know. Austin Hooper gets a 4-year, $44 million deal from the Cleveland Browns. They already had David Njoku. They have Jarvis Landry. They have Kareem Hunt. They have Nick Chubb. They have Odell Beckham. Adding in a very expensive, they made Austin Hooper, I believe, the highest paid tight end in the league until George Kittle signs his deal. It just seemed unnecessary to me. It's not that Austin Hooper's not a good player. I think he's fine, but just seemed unnecessary to me. And we're adding more mouths to feed in Cleveland now, in an offense that had trouble feeding all those mouths last season. We do have a regime change, though, which I guess in theory helps. And we do know that Kevin Stefanski ran a lot of 2 tight end sets last year with Irv Smith and Kyle Rudolph. So were you surprised that Cleveland got in on Austin Hooper? They kind of came out of, I didn't hear a lot of people saying that Austin Hooper was going to land with Cleveland, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
No, all the rumors before free agency were about the Bears and the Packers and the Redskins. But yeah, look, I think that Austin Hooper is not necessarily a dynamic tight end, but I do think that he adds a level of stability and reliability that David Njoku right now, just has not brought to the table. We've seen big flashes from David Njoku, and I think that they should keep David Njoku. He only cost $3 million this year. Mm-hmm. That's nothing. And I think that the move was just kind of an indication of what Kevin Stefanski wants to do. I think they don't have a third receiver, by the way, but they do have Odell Beckham, they do have Jarvis Landry, and now they have 2, kind of potentially complementary tight ends. You mentioned that the Vikings ran a ton of 2 and even 3 tight end sets this past year, and I think that if they just use David Njoku as that third receiver, or even Austin Hooper, depending on the personnel package, the down and distance and all that, then I think that this can be a pretty interesting offense. They were one of the worst coached teams in the NFL last season, and I think that they're going to be a lot better coached. Austin Hooper is only 25 years old. He's going to hit free agency again when he's 29. He has caught almost 80% of his career targets. And I just think that the reliability that he brings to a team that really, outside of Jarvis Landry, lacked reliability in their passing game whatsoever. I think that kind of justifies the move for Cleveland.
Yeah, I would have loved to see them dump a bunch of money on offensive line, but maybe that's their plan in the draft or elsewhere.
They did sign Jack Conklin.
Right. Yeah, that cost them a boatload too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're not going to go over offensive line and positions like that, but if you go to Evans' free agency tracker, you can get all of his comments on the offensive line and defensive players and stuff like that. Would encourage people to do so. Speaking of some under the radar moves, I think the Hayden Hurst move is, not many people are talking about this Hayden Hurst move. Falcons gave up a second round pick to get Hayden Hurst, like soon after the Austin Hooper deal was announced. I mean, Hayden Hurst was a big time prospect, caught 92 balls over his last 2 years at South Carolina, first round pick of the Ravens. I think it was 25th overall in the 2018 draft. Like, I'm not going to say that because Hayden Hurst didn't pop with the Ravens that he can't play. And now this Austin Hooper role is open. Do you think Hayden Hurst can fill the Austin Hooper role on this Falcons team?
Yeah, I remember hearing about Hayden Hurst before the 2018 draft. He was a failed baseball player. He was a really good baseball player, but he got the yips, and he just he couldn't play anymore. And so he took up football. And I remember watching him before the draft, and I was like, man, this guy's like an intriguing sleeper, like for the third or fourth round. He goes in the first round. He's a good athlete, obviously. He's played 2 professional sports. And then, Mark Andrews is just better than him. I mean, just straight up, Mark Andrews is better than him as a receiver, and Nick Boyle is better than him as a blocker. Now, Mark Andrews is one of the best receiving tight ends in the league. Nick Boyle is one of the best blocking tight ends in the league. So I don't think that Hayden Hurst is a bum by any means. And, yeah, I think that he could jump right into – this guy gained a ton of fantasy value with this move. The Falcons essentially gave up a second-round pick to get him. He jumps right into that high-volume Austin Hooper role. He's always got to beat out is Jaden Graham. I don't think he's going to have any problem doing that. He has the first-round draft capital behind him. He was number 10 among tight ends this past year in yards per route run. He caught 30 of 37 targets for 349 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, I think, this is like you could not – Austin Hooper leaving and then Hayden Hurst jumping into that role, you could not draw up a better scenario for Hayden Hurst to find than this one. I mean, Mohamed Sanu's gone. They need another passing game weapon, and he's going to get a boatload of opportunity to fill that.
Will this affect your extreme optimism on Calvin Ridley at all?
No. I mean, no. Calvin Ridley is just he's going off regardless, man. They could sign Jerry Rice, and it wouldn't matter. Jerry Rice.
Speaking of the Atlanta Falcons, not a surprise, I don't think, but I still want to touch on it that before free agency, before the league year opened, they did decide to cut Devontae Freeman, and I thought Devontae Freeman looked like he was on his last legs last year, losing snaps to Ito Smith, losing snaps to Quadra Allison, to Brian Hill, etc. I'm not sure that Devontae Freeman's going to end up signing anywhere else and having much of an impact, but it does leave a pretty big hole in a pretty good offense. I mean, they have nothing now. They have the guys that I mentioned. Falcons have to be one of the biggest candidates to spend a lot of draft capital at the running back position. Who do you think is a good fit in this rookie class? I saw some people mentioning Edwards-Helaire. I've seen some other mentions about first or second round picks at the running back position for the Falcons. I mean, they could step right in and be fantasy's number 1 rookie running back if they're given the keys to the car here.
Yeah, I think there's a ton of guys that are good fits. I think that Cam Akers from Florida State. I think that Clyde Edwards-Helaire from LSU. Absolutely. I mean, Clyde Edwards-Helaire from LSU, his game is similar to Devontae Freeman's. When Devontae Freeman was in his prime, really, really good in the passing game. Good enough between the tackles. I think there's a ton of guys that they could go get in the second or third round and just plug and play them. Devontae Freeman, there's been some rumors of him maybe drawing interest from the Lions. I think he's going to end up probably being a backup or part of a frustrating committee and, not really helping us much in fantasy this year.
We mentioned Hayden Hurst as a potential sleeper tight end, and we talked about Blake Jarwin before on this podcast. Jason Witten has signed with the Las Vegas Raiders. Blake Jarwin goes, I don't know where Dallas is getting all this money from, but Dallas gives Blake Jarwin 3 years, 24.5 million. I'm optimistic about Blake Jarwin, maybe too much, but I think in this offense, Blake Jarwin has a real chance to be among the top 12 fantasy tight ends. Is that too aggressive for Blake Jarwin, especially now that Jason Witten is officially gone?
No, man, I'm on this Blake Jarwin, man. I mean, I think that the one obstacle is that he might be used as like a situational player because he's not a good blocker. But I mean, he was very good in the passing game when he got opportunities this past year. Number 7 among tight ends in yards per route run, number 6 in yards per target. They gave him a pretty sizable deal, like definitely a deal that they didn't need to give it to him. I mean, they could have easily just kept him on a second round tender for around $3 million, but they're paying him like $6 million a year, and he's only 25 years old. I mean, yeah, I think that the arrow is definitely pointing up on him. He's a guy that might be on like some dynasty league waiver wires right now. I think that Hayden Hurst even made, has made appearances on our dynasty league waiver wire at times. I mean, these are guys that have gained a ton of value within the past few days.
For sure. And also, the Cowboys getting a lot of continuity. I mean, I know they changed their head coach, but Kellen Moore, they bring Dak back on the franchise tag. Amari seemed like maybe he was looking elsewhere, but ends up getting a $100 million deal from the Cowboys. Obviously, they have Zeke on their contract. So a lot of continuity for the Dallas Cowboys. I think their offense has a chance to be really, really awesome. Yeah. And for sure, like one of the leaders in yards per play, candidates to be among the leaders in yards per play this year.
And they're bringing back their O-line, and they are, pulling out Jason Witten, pulling out Randall Cobb, and like going to get more production from better players, better younger players.
Totally agree. All right, a couple more here. The Jimmy Graham one was just like, I mean, so laugh out loud. I know you live in there in Chicago, and I think, Ryan Pace has had some extremely questionable moves. This one to me is a fireable offense. 2 years, $16 million, $9 million guaranteed for Jimmy Graham, who I believe is 33 years old now. Jimmy Graham wasn't even in your top 100 among free agents, deservedly so. Like, we joke about Donald Parham. I actually think Donald Parham can help an NFL team more than Jimmy Graham can at this point. Donald Parham obviously would be league minimum. So just totally egregious signing. They also have Trey Burton, who they're paying, who's like scared to play football. They're paying him a ton of money also. When do we fire Ryan Pace? It's already been too late.
Yeah, I mean, this guy won the NFL Executive of the Year award over Chris Ballard 2 years ago. I mean, what a joke. Yeah, there are 3 teams that have stood out as just making like, what are you doing moves? And it's been the Bears, obviously the Texans, and the Lions. Just really have stood out as having like head-scratching free agency periods so far.
For sure. All right, last one that broke just before we came on air here. Philip Rivers has agreed to a 1-year, $25 million deal with the Indianapolis Colts. This is something we talked about after Evan got back from the Combine, where everybody was talking about it. It comes true. Philip Rivers, obviously very, very check downy, but he has had some excellent pass catching backs. How do you think Philip Rivers fits with what Indy has right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you look at Nyheim Hines as a guy who potentially could elevate from this signing. I mean, Danny Woodhead, Austin Eckler. I don't think that Nyheim Hines is as good as either of those guys. But, I mean, that's the role that he plays. And, I mean, he's got some explosiveness to him. And if he, we still got to get through the draft. We still got to get, there's a bunch of running backs that are still going to sign for really cheap deals. But if he can kind of outlast all those periods where there's going to be more transactions made and maintain that passing game role, I think he has a chance to become really, really interesting. And I also think that I wouldn't rule out Marlon Mack taking on a bigger receiving role. I remember watching him in college, and I thought that he was a good receiver. I mean, he has plus receiving skills, I think, and he just has not been used in that role. So that'll be something that we're monitoring, like training camp reports about that kind of stuff, seeing during preseason who's on the field with Philip Rivers in passing situations. And then, yeah, I mean, I think that, Philip Rivers is, we talked about it on the Combine podcast. Like there's been a really, really strong buzz all along about Philip Rivers going to the Colts, and ultimately that's where he landed.
I'm curious if you were running a team, not fantasy, a real team, who would you rather have right now for this season, Philip Rivers or Tom Brady?
Oh man, that's a tough question. I mean, I'd probably go with Tom Brady, just because of the kind of the the resume and how he is performed like in really high leverage situations.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's an interesting debate.
I think from football IQ perspective, it's like Tom Brady by a mile.
Yeah.
But from like making your teammates better, from being able to have a wider playbook of things you can do, I would rather have Philip Rivers. So it's definitely something interesting. All right. I was going to add some defensive stuff on here, like Javon Hargrave to the Eagles and Byron Jones and Kyle Van Noy to the Dolphins and stuff like that. But we'll save all that stuff for when we have more time, when there's not as much insanely big news popping off. This has been a wild first couple of days of free agency. So we're going to go ahead and cut it off there. We'll be back as soon as possible with more free agency news. So, for Evan, for producer Luke, for Jerry, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.